Welcome back. Now, after the short break from the ICC cases occasioned by an adjournment, the first witness is set to be revealed tomorrow. ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda is expected to call witness number 536 to stand in her effort to prove that Deputy President William Ruto and radio journalist Joshua Arap Sang were the architects of the 2007-2008 post-election skirmishes. But on the other hand, the push to withdraw from the Rome Statute and halt the cases at the ICC is on high gear. Some members of parliament believe the ICC cases are robbing Kenyans of their sovereignty. Well, to tell us more about the ICC in the light of the Constitution is constitutional lawyer Dr. Ekuru Aukot. You can remember him as the former boss of the committee of experts that drew up the Constitution. Welcome to the Power Breakfast.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. Perhaps just to focus on the Constitution a bit, in its third year, would you say the leaders have been faithful in upholding the spirit and letter of the Constitution?
Well, I'll say no. A lot has happened since the Constitution was promulgated. As you very well know that there are always two narratives to the Constitution: the Constitution building and the Constitution implementation. Now, the implementation part, the building, of course, is a negotiation. People come to the table and say, this is what we want. This is our philosophy as a country right from the preamble. Why are we making this Constitution? What aspects do we want to bring into the Constitution? How should we behave? I mean, in other words, the Constitution is meant to reorder society in the way in which we do things, bring change, some sort of a paradigm shift. But, of course, the other story about implementation. Now, implementation really requires people who believe in the Constitution itself, not just in the letter, but in the spirit. We will always be reminded why we made this Constitution for ourselves. And in fact, in our own Constitution, we capture the fact that we are making this Constitution for ourselves, but for future generations too. So there is a fiduciary duty for those today to protect that Constitution, to prepare the grounds for a future generation. And I think on a balance of probability, you can say that I think the rest of us are probably living bonus life now. I mean, we should be protecting this Constitution for our children and for our grandchildren. So what is shameful to note on the last 3 years that people have personalized and individualized the Constitution. It's more about themselves, more about preservation of that which they believe in. It's no longer about society. It's no longer about the intent of the Constitution, which is why you can see the conduct of parliamentarians. You can see the scramble for position. You can see the way positions are being sought is based on tribe, ethnicity. So there is actually a whole lot of compromise on the Constitution. You see, even before we settle a lot of the things that we're supposed to do, for example, reform of the judiciary. Even before we reform the judiciary, you can already see the fighting in the judiciary. I mean, Kenyans are beginning to see that this fight between, for example, JSC and the chief registrar is in a way, and I've heard many people say, can we now begin to have confidence that the judiciary will implement certain aspects of the Constitution? And you see, this is happening in the face of the scramble for ICC cases to be brought back home, to be tried by who? When you have all these misgivings. You have got the vetting of judges and magistrates vetting board still undertaking a clean-up exercise, because when Kenyans were making the Constitution, they said, we want to dismiss all judges and magistrates afresh, because they really wanted the institution of the judiciary to be the vanguard of justice. An institution where, in the light of 2007-2008 post-election violence, people can actually see justice. The victims of Kiamba and others, people whose property were destroyed, people who were murdered, people who were raped. Today, as we speak, Mutegi, we know we have children born out of rape during the post-election violence. These are victims of those. But, you know, nobody really has gone for the culprits today in Kenya. Nobody even talking about it. Instead, we are focusing so much of our energy on the ICC. So the other reason I'm thinking that the Constitution is failing is, I think, is because, well, not the Constitution is failing, but the leaders are failing in the Constitution, in realizing the fruits of the Constitution. It's because there's been a lot of politicization. And I think the recipe for that is in the last general election, where coalitions, in my view, and I've said this many times, was based more on how do we bring certain tribes together to win against the others. As a matter of fact, and I dare argue here that Kenya is more divided than before, but in a subtle way. People are disgruntled every day. People are complaining. I mean, today, just look at the implication of things like the VAT Act itself on the common mwananchi. As a matter of fact, this is probably the only country in the world where the price of milk is higher than the price of petrol. Despite petrol being pumped from Iraq, shipped, refined here, you still find a liter of milk more expensive than a liter of petrol. And yet milk is something that we produce ourselves. So this has a direct impact on the ordinary mwananchi, who, when he was making the constitution, he proposed for economic rights, socio-economic rights in chapter 4, that today there will be guarantee on the right to food, right to employment, health, education. So really, if you were to analyze today in terms of what is happening on the ground, really, I think there's desperation. There's disillusionment.
You recently said, in relation to the fact that the leaders are really not exercising fidelity to the Constitution, you said the chorus to amend the Constitution from various quarters is an indication or indicator that what ails the country is lack of leaders with vision and integrity.
As a matter of fact, that's what Kenyans said. When Kenyans analyze where they have come from as a country, right from the era of the colony, post-colonial era, at the time when we're now making the Constitution, one of the things they said very decisively, and I was privy to all the memoranda given by Kenyans as to what they want in the Constitution, was the fact that one of the frailties of our society, the failings of our society, was the question of leadership. And therefore, Kenya is a very unique country in the whole world. That is the only country in whose constitution they have dedicated a whole chapter called leadership and integrity. They therefore said, we want a certain type and character of a leader who will bring respect to the office he's holding or she's holding, a leader who in private or in public must behave himself in a certain way. But analyze the kind of leadership we have today. When the parliamentarians came on board this new parliament, the first thing was, how much did we earn? They forgot that we came from a parliament which was 222 members of parliament. Therefore, the cost, one way or the other, could have been manageable, even though it wasn't really manageable. Now we are talking about a parliament of 439 members. A parliament that's so bloated, again in the light of the fact that we now have another level of government called devolution, which has a governor, his deputy, executive, members of the county assembly. These are whole people we must be. And then a county commissioners. County commissioner, county public staff. So all this is a cost. Now, you would have expected a leadership that says, in the light of all this, I think we should not demand so much, because at the end of the day, it is the services that Kenyans want devolve: health, education, infrastructure, security, that must be realized. So much so that every 2 years we don't have to talk of the Merile having killed 50 or 30 Turkanas and nothing happened, because those people expect that security service will have been devolved to that every part of the country. So that you don't expect the people of Moyale today, or Mandera, Tana Delta, Kwale, people expect security. So these are all services that come with a cost. So when leaders want to hoard benefits of their positions to themselves, it's actually a failing in the leadership. And I think for me, if we don't have leaders, the drivers of change, then the constitution that we wrote to ourselves may be worth nothing other than the paper it's written on. And this is the truth elsewhere in the world. I mean, leadership is everything. Countries that colonize, a country that colonized us, the UK, the United Kingdom, doesn't have a written constitution. But you don't hear the British people complain about a constitution like this, because a leadership is keen on what they want to give to their people. Israel does not have a written constitution. New Zealand does not have a written constitution. But the leadership there says they know what they want their people to have. I was listening to the debate in Parliament, and I watched it painfully, I must say, when Hadan Duale, a friend, I must say, was moving the motion. And he kept on referring that Kenya is going to join developed democracies like the United States, Pakistan, India, and the rest. But I tell you one thing, and this is where the leadership is dishonest. Because if he was truthful to people of Kenya, he would have said, in those democracies, once you are suspected not to have even paid your taxes,
you resign.
In fact, before even you resign, you do not even offer yourself into a position of leadership. That's what happens in mature democracies. You know that in Britain, for example, and others, members of parliament went to jail because of just cheating on the mileage. You do not present yourself, so that people fail to talk, people begin to question about health and education. They reduce the issues that matter to the Mwananchi. But in Kenya, it's about how we coalesce on numbers of our region, numbers of our tribe, numbers of political parties. So really leadership, I think for me, is failing. Even the current discourse we are having, everybody is talking about the ICC. But what about the victims of human rights violations? Do you hear anybody talking about that other than my good friend, the lawyer's victim, Nderitu? Nobody in our leadership today is telling us, in Kiambaa, a woman was actually escaping with a child after they'd been huddled into the church and it was on fire. And then some fellow chased after that woman, brought her back and locked her into the church and burned her to life. How come nobody's talking to us about that woman and that child? How come nobody's telling us about today whether we can say we are all equal citizens? Because the Constitution guarantees equality of all citizens and equity. Today we have IDPs in this country. Even if we give them 100,000,
400,000,
whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Imagine a person who lost a property. Yeah. And for me, I would have really loved to see us reconstructing Kiambaa. You know, saying that let the Kalenjin and the Kikuyu now walk hand in hand, and we see that because that's what the Constitution envisages, that we are a nation state. I don't think today we can argue that, even with this kind, the ICC, the debate for ICC Pullout, really we are, I think, embarrassing ourselves. And I want to say that those people who are pushing for the ICC, the Kenyans to pull out of the ICC, is actually, in my view, embarrassing the president and his deputy, because they're the ones who are being tried. In all probability, people will just look and say, oh, well, I think these are the troops of the president anyway. I think it's an embarrassing situation.
I mean, you know, generally looking at even the term victim, it has been used differently. We're looking at the victims of the post-election violence, but even the accused are calling themselves victims of wrongful accusations. So they're also fighting for their right to be justly tried. And at the same time, the question that really begs is, if we allow the two principles to be tried in a foreign court, are we not losing our sovereignty?
We are not losing our sovereignty. One, the reason we are not losing our sovereignty is this. Let me make two important points. First, when the debate about the Hague, the ICC, was ripe in this country, that's the time when we are making our constitution. And you remember, I wish Mutula Kilonzo will rise from the death today and remind Kenyans that he moved two motions, if I recall correctly, in Parliament, that let's domesticate the trials of the ICC. Mother Karua can also confirm she did a similar thing, and many, many other members of Parliament. People said, don't be vague.
Go to the Hague.
Go to the Hague. And there seems to have been consensus both ways. And why? Because at that time we were reconstructing our institutions. So there was really no faith and trust in our institution, especially the judiciary. Remember, the judiciary had been judged a very corrupt institution. Even today as we speak, there's still a process of cleaning up the judiciary. I mean, not long ago, I don't know, you must have read that some judges who had been recruited had been arrested, they're being investigated. So really, in the light of all this, that time, there was no trust in the judiciary. We are still reconstructing. You remember the recruitment of the Chief Justice, the judges and everybody. I mean, so it was very controversial. People said, we want somebody who can drive the institution of the judiciary. Yeah. So really, that for me is a fundamental point that must be made. But secondly, Kenyans said, we are going to be part of civilized nations. And as part of the civilized nation, we are going to embrace international norms and standards on the rule of law on the protection of human rights, which is why in their wisdom, Kenyans said, we want to incorporate all international treaties to which Kenya is signatory to, which we have signed, which is why we have got Article 2, Clause 5, and Clause 6, which really incorporates all international treaties, because we are part of that civilized nation. And the reason is this: those who use international law. Civilized nations will not allow their people to be killed en masse. Civilized nation will submit you to the rule of law, that there is equality before the rule of law and access to our courts. It does not matter your position, who you are. That's what happens in civilized democracies, in civilized nations. But I think in Kenya, it seems to me, we are saying we are not civilized enough. Let us count the deaths, let's count how many people we kill, and we still excuse it because we can coalesce ourselves around numbers, around politics. So for me, and I'm not saying Uhuru, Ruto, or Sang are guilty, because, I mean, the principle of the law is that, criminal law is that they're innocent until proven guilty. So let them clear the names. And in fact, it's even in their own best interests, for their own personal sakes, for their families, for this country, that they clear their names. And it's very, very important. And people should not now try dangling the fact that it's a president, it's a deputy president. It does not matter. You know, it is an individual. And I think even the president himself has been magnanimous enough to say, this is not about the presidency of Kenya, this is personal. I think he's recorded, he's said to have said that. No, this is personal. And it's, for him, it's so I think when I looked at Duale and the rest arguing their case for Kenya to pull out, and I said, as I said earlier on, they actually embarrassed the president and his deputy, because the crafting of the motion was predicated on the fact that these are democratically elected individuals. I wish there was even reference to Sang in that motion. Yeah. You know, that this is also a citizen of this country or something like that. So that's what I'm saying. I think this motion, this idea of pulling out of the ICC is actually embarrassing our president. It's embarrassing the presidency of Kenya. Because tomorrow, if Uhuru is going to the UN General Assembly to address the Committee of Nations, which Kenya is a member of, you can imagine the perspective they look at him in the light of what is, quote unquote, his lieutenants are doing, the Duales and the rest. So for me, I think it's an embarrassing debate. I think, in my honest opinion, this call for Kenya pulling out of the ICC must be reversed. Because after all, it doesn't even help the accused right now. Because it is for future cases. And in any case...
In your thinking, why do you think they're doing it? Because it puzzles people. It puzzles everybody. First of all, they do it as if it's an emergency. And yet it will not affect the case. Agency. Why is it they're doing it? And they're grown-up people. They are members of parliament. They're in the Senate. Some of them are lawyers like you. Why? What?
Well, the reason they're doing it is because there are many reasons one can find. But for me, when I watched the debate, I just saw sycophants. It's sycophancy. I see sycophancy. I saw mediocrity at play. I saw people who, in my view, really do not know themselves, are not conscious. They're not a conscious people. Because if I was Duale and I was conscious about where I come from, which is Garissa or Northeastern, I should be pushing for the implementation of the TJRC report. Yeah. Because in Northeastern, the Wagala massacre happened. The Garissa massacre happened. I should be pushing for the report on why are the Gare and the Murule in Mandera killing each other. I should be pushing why in Northeastern you do not have infrastructure, roads. Why there insecurity? Why is there terrorism? That for me is what is urgent, because it continues to rob this country of its citizens. I should be pushing for a motion why citizens of another country called the Merile are killing citizens of Kenya. These are acts of aggression. I should be pushing a motion why Ethiopia should be explaining to us as Kenyans why its citizens continue to kill our people. I should be pushing a motion on why Tana Delta, those people have been killed. Even today in paper you saw, for example, the politics, that the politicians in Moyale are barring the investigation, the probe into the actual killing. I should be pushing. Those are, for me, is what's urgent. What's urgent to me is about UNGA for this country. I'm thinking about the man and woman, the child in Kibera, in Madare, a child in the rural areas, whether they can actually today afford milk. I'm thinking about the youth of this country that we say are 60%. In terms of jobs, in terms of access to the universities. I'm thinking about the crisis we have at our universities in terms of accommodation, money. That for me is what is urgent. Because to create an urgency out of pulling out the ICC, as I said, is not even helpful to our president and to our deputy president. So the reason they are doing this really is because for me, we just have a poor leadership in those individuals. And I hope the people who elected these individuals are actually watching, and I hope they can invoke Article 104, recall them and fire them, because it's even embarrassing to the constituents of those where they come from. And my good friend Bando Kabando, in his debate, just went racist, if you ask me, because he kept on talking about Muzungus, whites, and stuff like that. We can't say that. We can't really. I think if we want to claim to be members of a civilized nation, we can't begin to use such overtones. You know, I think for me, that for me is lack.
What about the argument that like Karaito Murungi, the senator, arguing that it is targeting Africa, that the majority of the cases are African in the ICC.
Okay.
Therefore,
maybe Africans needs to get their act together, because so what? Just because he's targeting Africa, he didn't say what is happening in Africa is wrong. Did he make a converse argument to say that what's happening in Africa is wrong? If Africans are very busy and are good at violating human rights of their own citizen, then let them be targeted. But in any case, it's not even true. There are many other people who've been before the ICC. I mean, cases from Eastern Europe and the rest. But there is also an argument, and which we have also made before, and we are not excusing the ICC necessarily. We have also said that the ICC also ought to have gone for people like Tony Blair and Bush because of their decisions to invade Iraq. I mean, so yes, to some extent there is a valid argument that why are they not going for citizens of this first world who have actually, because of their activities, because of military actions, they have actually caused the killing of many people. But you see, that does not excuse us. Does it excuse the fact that in 2007, 2008, about 1,300 Kenyans lost their lives? Did we not see people being pulled out of buses in Naivasha? Do we not see people being burned in churches? I mean, what kind of society are we, honestly, Mutegi? That you burn people. You know, every Sunday you will see Kenyans going to church and praying. I think we are a very pretentious country. We are very immoral people. Because every Sunday we are so religious. We go to church, we go to mosque and everything. But remember, people are burnt in the house of God.
Those priests and the church people who are praying for those, they don't pray for the victims.
I don't know why one time, I wish we could see more and more of crusades, the IDPs, villages, and us pouring a lot of oil and stuff to the other. Because I think you can also see the pretext, the pretense. And I think for me, I just think, and I like to argue many times, maybe there is something psychic about us as a people. Something is wrong about our national psyche. Because how is it that we can easily forget? And by the way, in international criminal law, I don't think you can say that the suspects are themselves victims. Unless, of course, in the course of trial, that certain fundamentals have not been followed, so they have not been victimized. Unless maybe the trial itself is shambolic, is kangaroo, then you can say, I mean, these people are victims of an injustice. But as we speak today, the real victims of the post-election violence are those who lost their dear ones, those who died, those who do not have homes, those who are now continuing to live in fear. Those are the victims.
There's an argument, reading the article written by Ngunjiri Wambugu.
Yeah.
He says he has had an opportunity to speak to some of the victims, and generally there's a perspective, or there's a perception that perhaps we shouldn't go on with the ICC cases. The reason is, these are the two leaders who actually seemingly brought peace in the Rift Valley. And the question is, what if one of them is found guilty and the other one is not? What will happen to the future of the peace that is generally being experienced at the moment?
You know, I also come from Rift Valley, and I don't know what peace this is, but the truth for the matter is this. We should encourage the president and the deputy president to create peace in this country. it is actually their responsibility, and they have got a duty on Kenyans to create peace. And we should support them. I mean, a fact of life today in Kenya is that Uhuru and Ruto are our president and deputy president. It's a fact. And they are our presidents. Wherever they go, they represent us as a country. So we must encourage them to create peace. But have we measured what we really mean by that peace? You see, the fear I have is that when you have the people like Nangunjiri and the rest talking about this peace, what measure have they put on the table to actually, or what evidence have they put on the table to actually say that we have measured this is peace in those areas? I dare you, I mean, Mokasi, today I am sure, I think the people who lost their relatives in Kiamba are not peaceful. You see, the absence of conflict, I mean, the experts in conflict will tell you that, or resolution, that the absence of actual conflict or war does not necessarily guarantee peace. I don't know about you, but I hear a lot of disgruntlement every day. People appear not to be peaceful. You and I who wake up at 5 or 4 to come and work and make a living for our families and our children, when we see petrol going up, we see the state of roads, I don't think we are at peace. Yeah, you can't say just because Kenya is not at war or fighting that we are peaceful people. I don't think so. I mean, every day in my capacity, what I do is we deal with a lot of ethnic tensions, overtones. People are angry. I mean, this country needs serious healing. And I must say that the TJSC had a very great opportunity, but again, the way the reports are now being treated, it also makes you wonder whether we eventually will uncover the truth so that we can say we have actually reconciled with ourselves.
Isn't it a dead paper, the TJSC report?
I don't know. I want to give the leaders the benefit of doubt that they can bring it out.
But they wanted to bring the parliament and make an amendment.
I'll give you another example of a situation where people cannot necessarily be at peace. There's a good friend of mine who, members of the Rai family, I think 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court made a decision that was so devastating. And in their case, they pursued justice for about 14 years, involving a judge who was literally writing the pleadings and inviting an advocate to come and argue the case before him. But eventually, in our attempt to, this is a family fighting. So they came in under Section 14 of the Supreme Court Act. But eventually the case was thrown away because one of the judges who was initially involved in the Court of Appeal was also sitting in the Supreme Court. So you want to tell me the Rai family, especially those who are disgruntled, are happy people with this country. They are not happy with the judiciary. They are not happy with all the institutions, the law enforcement agencies. They are not at peace. And Kenya is not at war. So when people talk about peace, we really must think about it in a lot of variants. I mean, we should not just think because nobody is throwing arrows at the other that we must, even the confidence, I can walk comfortably in this country. So, I mean, back to the point really, I think for me, the president and his deputy have a duty to bring Kenyans together. They have a duty to build a nation state by keying in certain messages. But I'm not going to be naive that this country, we have pretended for the longest time to be a nation state. We are not. We are just tribes who have been brought together by an act of God, either because we are born in Kenya or in the geographical area called Kenya, but we don't really love each other. We don't care for each other because there's a lot of